London in early autumn has a strange way of holding you between two worlds. The evenings are cool but not yet cold, the fog curls gently around street lamps, and the air smells faintly of wet stone and burnt sugar from corner cafes. It was in this liminal season, weeks after the divorce papers were finalized, that I met her, Clara. She was nothing like the ghost of my marriage. Where my ex-wife carried silence like a weapon, Clara wielded laughter as if it were light. We met in a bookshop near Bloomsbury, both reaching for the same battered edition of Eliot's Four Quartets. Our hands touched, awkwardly, and she smiled with a warmth that felt utterly undeserved. I was 41, graying at the temples, my confidence fractured into brittle shards. Yet Clara looked at me as though I were still whole. She asked questions, and more strangely, she listened. We had coffee that day, then dinner the next. Within a week I found myself smiling again, unreasonably, like a schoolboy who'd stumbled into some impossible fortune. London seemed different in her presence. The rain no longer drummed with loneliness but sang, the streets glistened as if polished for us, the hum of traffic softened into a kind of music. Even my flat, a cramped two-bedroom in Camden, felt less like a mausoleum and more like a space waiting to be filled. Clara's stories were full of vitality. She worked part-time at a gallery, painted on weekends, and spoke about colors as though they were living things. She had that rare charm of making the ordinary glow, telling me about the way she brewed tea, or how she preferred walking through fog rather than sunlight, because the world felt more honest when blurred at the edges. I remember one night, we stood on Waterloo Bridge, the Thames breathing fog beneath us. She slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Do you feel it too? The city watching us?" Her voice was half playful, half solemn. I laughed, but the truth was, I did feel it, a curious intimacy, as though London itself approved of us. Days blurred into weeks. I dared not call it love yet, though the word burned quietly inside me. It was something gentler at first, hope, fragile but insistent. Clara restored to me the dangerous belief that life could begin again, even after endings that felt absolute. It was on an evening tinged with violet dusk when she invited me to meet her family. We were sitting in a small Italian restaurant near Soho, red wine softening the edges of the day. Clara twirled her hair, hesitant for the first time since I'd known her. "They've been asking about you," she said, eyes flicking toward the candle between us. "I think they'll like you. I'd love for you to see where I grew up." Her words carried no malice, but something in her tone tightened a knot deep in my stomach. Perhaps it was the idea of stepping into her past, into a place where she wasn't just mine but someone else's daughter, sister, niece. Still, I agreed without hesitation. "A bit outside the city," she added. "Old Victorian place, near the edge of Blackheath. It's different from here. You'll see." The way she said different left a trace in the air, a shadow on the tablecloth. Yet her smile returned, and with it, my eagerness. That night I dreamt of long hallways filled with portraits, faces watching me as I passed. But when I woke to the gentle patter of rain against my window, the unease dissolved like mist. I told myself it was only nerves. Clara kissed me goodbye the next morning, her scent a blend of lavender and paint. She whispered, "Saturday then. Don't be late." And so it began, the journey that would take me from the warmth of new love into the cold corridors of doubt, where shadows stretched too far and the air itself seemed to breathe. Saturday dawned in a pale haze, the kind of morning London excels at, mist pressed close against windows, light reduced to a watery smear. The streets smelling faintly of damp leaves and iron. I took the train from Charing Cross, watching as the city thinned into quieter suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to stretches of green tinged with fog. Clara sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. She was dressed in a wool coat the color of wine, her hair tumbling freely, her eyes alight with some secret anticipation. You'll like them, she said, though the words sounded less like assurance and more like command. They're particular, but kind. My uncle especially. He's very curious about you. Curious? I echoed, forcing a smile. She tilted her head, studying me. Yes. He likes to understand people. You'll see. The train screeched into Blackheath Station. We stepped off, and the air felt different somehow, thicker, colder, as though the fog here wasn't quite natural. Clara led me along narrow streets lined with Georgian terraces before turning toward an avenue where the houses grew larger, older, standing with a sternness that suggested they'd been watching the heath for centuries. The house itself rose out of the mist like something dredged from memory, a towering Victorian structure, its brick darkened with soot and age. Ivy clinging to its flanks as if trying to choke it. Iron gates stood ajar, their hinges groaning as Clara pushed them open. I tried to mask the prickle at the back of my neck. It was only a house, after all. Yet there was something oppressive in the way its windows seemed too tall, too narrow, like watchful eyes. Inside, the air was warm but faintly stale, scented with polish, old books, and something sharper beneath, camphor, perhaps, or medicine. The hallway stretched long and shadowed, its floorboards muffled by heavy Persian rugs. Portraits lined the walls, stern faces, dark eyes, brushstrokes that seemed almost alive in the dim light. A woman emerged first, Aunt, perhaps. She was tall, elegant in a black dress that swallowed the light, her hair pulled back severely. Her smile was thin, but her eyes glittered with sharp interest as they landed on me. So this is the man, she said, her voice smooth but edged. Welcome. One by one, they appeared, a cluster of family members, their faces carrying the same sharpness, the same hunger in their gaze. The uncle Clara had mentioned was a thick-set man with a booming laugh that never quite reached his eyes. He gripped my hand too tightly, holding it just long enough to feel intrusive. Questions came rapidly, as though rehearsed. Where was I from? What did I do? Did I believe in chance? In destiny? In the hidden order of things? I answered politely, though the questions grew stranger. One cousin leaned forward, asking in a whisper whether I ever dreamed of people who weren't alive. Another spoke of how the city's fog wasn't weather but memory, seeping through the cracks of time. They laughed when they said it, but the laughter was brittle, as though daring me to dismiss them. Clara seemed at ease among them, glowing with familiarity. She poured wine, kissed her uncle's cheek, touched her aunt's hand. Watching her, I felt a sudden, absurd distance, as if the woman I'd known in the city was only a fragment, and here she unfolded into someone more intricate, more secret. Dinner was served in a long dining room where the curtains were drawn tight, candles throwing shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The food was rich, heavy, each dish laced with spices I couldn't name. The family spoke over one another, voices rising, weaving strange tangents, about signs in the weather, coincidences in the neighborhood, illnesses cured by dreams. I tried to follow, but their rhythm was disorienting, a communal chant disguised as chatter. Whenever I fell silent, too lost to respond, I caught their eyes on me, measuring, assessing, as though I were being weighed on some invisible scale. At one point, Clara leaned toward me, her breath warm at my ear. "You're doing fine," she whispered, smiling. "They like you." Her reassurance should have soothed me, yet it only deepened my unease. Because the truth was, their attention didn't feel like liking. It felt like study. When dessert was cleared, the uncle raised a glass, his voice booming, to new beginnings. To the man who joins us tonight. May he see what we see, and never turn away. The family echoed the toast in eerie unison, their voices blending into something almost ritualistic. My stomach tightened. I forced the wine down, its sweetness cloying, the air suddenly too warm. For the first time, I wondered, not with dread yet, but with a tremor of recognition, whether I'd stepped into something larger than Clara, larger than love, larger even than myself. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits on the walls, those watchful eyes, had nodded in approval. After dinner, Clara took my hand and led me up the main staircase. The house seemed to groan around us, old timbers settling like the weight of centuries pressing down. The hallways smelled faintly of lavender mixed with dust, as though someone had tried and failed to disguise the age lingering in the wood. Our room, hers since childhood, she explained, was tucked at the far end of a corridor lined with more portraits. The faces here were different from those downstairs, not stern aristocrats but softer, almost blurred, as if the paint itself had decayed. In candlelight, their features shifted when I looked too long. Inside, the room was charming in a nostalgic way. A canopy bed draped with faded fabric, a writing desk cluttered with sketchbooks, shelves of books that seemed older than either of us. Clara moved easily, opening drawers, pulling out fresh sheets, humming under her breath. I tried to relax. It was only a house, I told myself. Only a family with quirks. But the unease lingered, fed by silence that seemed to swell in the walls. Clara noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're quiet," she said softly, slipping her arms around me. "Just taking it all in," I admitted. "They're an unusual family." Her smile was knowing. "Yes. But unusual can be beautiful, can't it?" Her lips brushed mine, and for a while, the strangeness receded. In her presence, the world always softened, like fog lifting after rain. Yet even in her embrace, I couldn't quite silence the feeling that something in the house was listening. That night, after we lay down, the house did not sleep. I heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate, as though someone were pacing the length of it over and over. Each time I thought they'd passed, they began again, closer. I held my breath, waiting for a knock, but none came. Clara slept soundly beside me, her breath deep and steady. At one point I shifted, trying not to wake her, and the bed creaked. Immediately, the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. I lay rigid, staring at the canopy above, until eventually exhaustion dragged me under. My dreams were thick with shadows, long corridors, doors that opened into other doors, faces in the portraits turning to follow me as I walked. When I tried to speak, no sound left my mouth. A sudden noise pulled me awake. For a moment I couldn't place it, then I realized it was laughter. Not Clara's, but higher-pitched, multiple voices, children perhaps. Yet I knew no children lived in the house. The laughter floated through the floorboards, rising and falling, until it faded into whispers I couldn't decipher. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the dying candle. Clara stirred, murmured something in her sleep, and turned away. I thought of waking her, but what would I say? That the house was alive? That its silence was full of voices? I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Old pipes, wind in the chimney. But I couldn't shake the memory of the family's strange questions at dinner, the way their words had woven together like threads in a web. Finally, I slipped out of bed, barefoot on the creaking boards. I opened the door slowly, the hallway stretching before me, pale with moonlight leaking through a single high window. The portraits were clearer now, their painted eyes gleaming faintly. I could have sworn one of them was smiling. I walked quietly, drawn toward the sound I thought I'd heard. The laughter had stopped, but a new sound replaced it, a low murmur, rhythmic, like chanting carried from a distance. It rose from below, from somewhere deeper in the house. I stood frozen, every instinct urging me back to bed. Yet curiosity, dangerous, gnawing, pushed me forward. I descended half the staircase, peering over the banister. The hall below was dim, lit only by a cluster of candles near the dining room. Shadows flickered along the walls, stretching into shapes too long for the figures that cast them. Voices blended together in cadence. I could not make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, reverent, ecstatic, almost feverish. The family stood in a circle, their hands joined, heads bowed. In the center of the table lay something small, glinting in the candlelight, too distant for me to see clearly. I wanted to retreat, to pretend I hadn't seen. But in that moment, Clara's aunt raised her head. Her eyes locked on mine, directly, as though she'd known I was watching all along. The chanting didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. I fled back up the stairs, heart racing, and slipped into bed beside Clara. She stirred, smiling faintly in her sleep, and nestled closer. I lay rigid until dawn, haunted by the sound of voices still echoing faintly in the walls, as though the house itself had memorized their chant. Morning arrived reluctantly, pale light filtering through heavy curtains, carrying with it the smell of damp stone and coal smoke. I hadn't slept more than an hour, yet Clara seemed radiant when she woke, stretching like a cat before leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Sleep well?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Mostly," I lied. She smiled knowingly, as though she could see through the lie but chose not to comment. "Come on. Breakfast is a big affair here." Downstairs, the family had already gathered. The dining room looked different in daylight, though not kinder. The curtains were still drawn, as though the sun were an intruder. The table was set with silver dishes, eggs, sausages, thick slices of bread, but what struck me was the silence. They all sat waiting, their eyes fixed on me as Clara led me in. Her uncle broke the quiet. "He looks tired," he said, voice booming. Aunt Lillian, if I remembered her name correctly, gave a thin smile. "It takes time to adjust to the house." No one laughed, yet they all nodded, as though in agreement with a truth too obvious to explain. I ate little, though Clara filled my plate twice. The others ate ravenously, almost mechanically, chewing in unison, pausing to glance at one another as though checking for rhythm. Every so often someone would mutter something under their breath, half prayer, half chant, but always too low for me to catch. When I asked a simple question, "How long has the house been in your family?" they erupted at once, voices overlapping. "Generations. Since before the city spread this far. It was here when the heath was wild. The house remembers more than we do." The last phrase hung in the air. I wanted to press further, but the way they all stared at me silenced my tongue. Clara touched my hand under the table, squeezing gently, her eyes soft, urging me not to be afraid. After breakfast, the family dispersed as if by unspoken command. Clara suggested a walk in the garden. The garden was vast, though overgrown, hedges curling into twisted shapes, roses blooming dark and heavy, their scent cloying. The fog clung stubbornly, making distances uncertain. From certain angles, I thought I saw movement among the hedges, figures slipping just out of sight. Clara laughed when I mentioned it. "Neighbors," she said lightly. "Everyone around here knows each other. You'll see." But I never saw faces, only shadows. Back inside, the hours passed strangely. I'd lose track of time. One moment sunlight would angle through the high windows, and the next the house would be dim again, as though twilight had returned too soon. I wandered the library while Clara painted upstairs. The shelves were crammed with leather-bound volumes, many without titles. The ones I opened contained strange notations, pages of symbols, diagrams of circles and eyes, words that looked like English but shifted into nonsense the longer I read. As I replaced one particularly heavy tome, I noticed a door half hidden behind the shelves. Its frame was old, warped, the handle rusted. I reached for it, but before I could turn the knob, Clara's cousin appeared silently behind me. "Not that room," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. "Why not?" "It's not for you." Her words offered no explanation. She smiled then, wide, too wide, and drifted away. That evening, the family gathered again, this time in the drawing room. A fire blazed despite the mild weather. They talked of the neighborhood, but not as normal people do. They spoke of patterns, which families fell ill on which days, which shops closed and reopened, how many crows gathered on the heath that morning. Each detail was delivered with solemn weight, as though evidence in a case only they understood. I tried to contribute, mentioning the train delays I'd seen on the way in. They fell silent, all of them, staring at me until the uncle chuckled. Yes, he said slowly. Even the trains are part of it. Part of what? Clara leaned against me, her warmth grounding, but her smile mirrored theirs. I realized with a start that she wasn't an outsider here. She belonged to this rhythm, this strange undercurrent of obsession. Later, as we prepared for bed, I confronted her gently. Clara, your family. They're unusual. She paused in brushing her hair, meeting my eyes in the mirror. Yes. But isn't everyone's in their own way? This feels different. Almost like they're all thinking the same thought. Her reflection smiled. Maybe they are. And maybe you will too, soon. The brush resumed its soft strokes. The room grew quieter, heavier, as though waiting for me to respond. But I said nothing. When the candle burned low, I lay awake again, listening. The footsteps returned, but this time they didn't stop outside the door. They lingered, slow and deliberate, circling, until I couldn't tell whether they came from the hallway, or inside the room itself. The fifth night, I think it was the fifth, though time had begun to slither strangely in that house, brought with it a heaviness in the air. As though the fog outside had seeped through the brickwork and settled into every room. Clara seemed restless all day, her movements quicker, distracted. She painted furiously, leaving streaks of crimson and black across the canvas, muttering under her breath words I couldn't catch. When I asked what she was working on, she simply smiled and said, "It's not finished until you've seen it." By dusk, the family gathered again, this time without pretense of casual conversation. No one spoke of weather, or neighbors, or trains. They moved with quiet purpose, each bringing candles, bowls of salt, heavy books that looked as though they would crumble if touched too roughly. I followed Clara into the dining room, now stripped of its finery. The long table was bare wood, gouged with marks I hadn't noticed before, as though knives had bitten into it over and over. At its center lay a circle of ash. The uncle gestured to me. "Join us." Something in me resisted. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought of fleeing the house altogether. Yet Clara's hand found mine, her eyes soft, pleading. "You'll see," she whispered. And so I sat. The candles were lit, dozens of them, their flames quivering as though in a shared breath. The family linked hands, their heads bowed. Clara's fingers curled around mine, warm but trembling. The chant began low, almost inaudible. At first it was a hum, then words I couldn't understand, fragments of Latin, perhaps, or something older, slipping just beyond recognition. The voices layered, overlapping, weaving into a rhythm that seemed to vibrate in my chest. I wanted to pull away. But the more I listened, the more I felt myself leaning forward, as though my body were not entirely my own. My heartbeat matched their cadence. The air thickened, hot wax dripping down candles in uneven rivulets. Then the uncle's voice rose above the rest. He spoke in English now, clear, deliberate. "We remember what the house remembers. We see what the house shows. We are bound." The family echoed, "We are bound." Clara's grip tightened on mine. Her lips moved with theirs, her voice blending seamlessly into the chorus. I sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to join. My silence marked me as other, and I felt their gazes flick toward me, even as their heads remained bowed. The ash at the center of the table shifted. I swear it did, not from wind, not from movement, but as though something beneath it stirred. A shape began to form, faint, the curve of a face, eyes hollow but present. A gasp escaped me. The family did not flinch. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. My ears rang with it, my vision blurring at the edges. The shape in the ash seemed to rise, taking form, a mouth opening soundlessly, as though to echo them. I tried to stand. Clara pulled me down sharply, her nails biting into my skin. "Don't," she whispered fiercely. "Don't break it." Her eyes were wide, luminous, filled not with fear but with devotion. The ritual continued until, at last, the uncle raised his hand. The voices fell silent. The candles flickered wildly, then steadied. The ash collapsed, the face dissolving into nothing. For a long moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing. Then the aunt smiled, her lips thin but triumphant. "He saw," she said quietly. "He saw." Every eye turned toward me. I wanted to deny it, to laugh, to dismiss what I'd witnessed as fatigue, as imagination twisted by sleepless nights. But the truth lodged in my throat. "Yes," the uncle said. "The house has begun to show him." The family nodded, murmuring in agreement, their faces glowing with a feverish satisfaction. Later, when Clara and I returned to her room, I confronted her in a trembling whisper. "What was that?" She sat on the bed, brushing ash from her hands as though it were nothing. "A tradition. You don't need to understand yet. Just trust it." "Clara, I saw." "Yes," she interrupted gently. "And once you've seen, it never leaves you. That's how it begins." I stared at her, my chest tight with confusion and dread. "Begins?" I repeated. She only smiled, that same soft, maddening smile, and reached for me. But when I finally slept, I dreamed not of her warmth, but of the ash shifting again, the face rising once more, and this time, it was my own. By the 6th day, I knew something was wrong beyond the walls of that house. Clara suggested we walk into the village that bordered the heath. "It'll do you good," she said brightly, slipping her arm through mine. "You've been so tense." I didn't argue. A part of me wanted desperately to see ordinary life again, to hear the chatter of strangers, the rattle of shop doors, the mundane rhythm of streets untouched by madness. The fog followed us, dense and unyielding, curling around hedgerows and lampposts. Houses loomed vague in the mist, their windows dark, their gardens overgrown. When we reached the high street, a strange hush hung over it. A butcher's shop stood open, but no customers lingered inside. The butcher himself watched us from behind the glass, cleaver in hand, expression unreadable. Clara waved cheerfully. He didn't respond. We passed a bakery. The scent of bread should have been comforting, but it was sour somehow, thick in my throat. Inside, two women stood behind the counter, not speaking, not moving, simply staring at the door as if waiting for us to enter. When we didn't, their heads tilted in unison, bird-like, before turning away. I whispered to Clara, "What's wrong with them?" She squeezed my hand. "They're just curious. Outsiders aren't common here. But you grew up here." "Yes," she said softly. "That's why they trust me. And soon, they'll trust you." Her words did not comfort me. If anything, they deepened the chill running through me. At the greengrocer's, a boy no older than 12 stood outside, tossing an apple up and down. He watched me with unsettling stillness, never blinking. When the apple slipped from his hand, it didn't fall, it hung in the air for the briefest moment, as though suspended, before dropping soundlessly into his palm again. I stopped, frozen. "Did you see that?" I hissed. Clara tilted her head. "See what?" "The apple, it didn't fall." Her laugh cut me off, warm and dismissive. "You're overtired. You should rest when we get back." But when I glanced at the boy again, he was still staring, lips curved into the faintest smile. We cut across the heath on the way back. The fog thickened there, swallowing sound. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed, a high, shrill laughter that echoed without source. Clara seemed unconcerned, walking ahead, her coat bright against the gray. I followed reluctantly, every step heavy. At one point I turned, certain I heard footsteps behind us. The mist revealed only emptiness, but the sound persisted, perfectly in sync with my own. Back at the house, the family greeted us as though they'd been waiting. No one asked about the village, yet I had the impression they already knew where we'd been, whom we'd seen, what I had noticed. At dinner, the uncle leaned close, his breath heavy with wine. "The heath is changing," he murmured. "Can you feel it?" I didn't answer. "The air carries memory," he continued. "Those who walk there breathe it in, whether they wish to or not. You've breathed it now." His eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as though had given me a gift. Later, Clara showed me the painting she'd been working on. My stomach lurched. It was a portrait of me, but not as I was. My face was pale, drawn, eyes too wide, shadows blooming beneath them. Behind me, indistinct figures loomed in fog, their hands outstretched, their mouths open in silent cries. "Do you like it?" she asked softly. My throat was dry. "Clara, why paint me like this?" She touched the canvas tenderly. "Because this is how the house sees you." I recoiled. "It's grotesque." Her expression hardened briefly, then softened into a smile that chilled me more than anger. "You'll understand soon. It isn't grotesque. It's true." That night, sleep evaded me. The footsteps returned, but this time they came from the ceiling, pacing above our bed. At some point, I heard the faint creak of the door opening, though when I turned, it was shut tight. And once, just before dawn, I awoke to find Clara sitting upright beside me, eyes open, staring at nothing. I whispered her name. She turned her head slowly, almost mechanically, and whispered back, "They're waiting for you." When I asked who, she only lay down again, already asleep. I no longer trusted the hours. Time inside that house stretched and shrank unpredictably, like a lung inhaling and exhaling around me. Sometimes the mornings arrived too quickly, the pale light slicing through curtains before it closed my eyes. Other times, dusk seemed to drag on endlessly, shadows bleeding into one another without surrendering to night. Clara appeared unchanged. She moved with the same warmth, the same charm, as though nothing in the world were wrong. And yet, when I looked too closely, her face seemed thinner somehow. Not physically, not in a way I could point to, but as though she were a copy of herself, painted onto fragile parchment that might tear at a touch. The family grew bolder. They no longer veiled their conversations when I was near. At meals, they spoke openly of visions, of whispers in the fog, of voices rising from the soil. One cousin described in detail the dream she'd had of her dead mother climbing through her window, smiling, mouth full of dirt. The others nodded, murmuring approval, as though it were a sermon. When I spoke, when I tried to steer conversation toward the ordinary, their silence pressed on me like weight. My words sounded alien even to my own ears, useless artifacts of a world that had stopped existing here. I began to lose track of what was dream and what was waking. I would drift into sleep and wake to find myself standing in the hallway, bare feet cold on the boards, portraits glaring down at me. One night I found myself in the library, the hidden door ajar, though I swore I'd never touched it. A faint draft seeped from the darkness beyond. Clara found me there, trembling, my hand on the knob. "You can't go in," she said softly. "Why not?" My voice cracked with exhaustion. "Because if you do, you won't come back out." Her words should have chilled me. Instead, they filled me with a perverse longing. What was in that room that they guarded so carefully? What truth had they buried behind rotting wood? The worst was the mirror. It hung in the corridor outside our bedroom, gilt frame tarnished with age. One evening, as I passed, I caught sight of my reflection. At first it was only me, pale, hollow-eyed, a stranger already. But as I leaned closer, the reflection smiled. My lips had not moved. I recoiled, breath sharp. Clara appeared beside me instantly, as though she'd been waiting. She touched the glass gently, leaving no mark. "The house is showing you," she whispered. "Don't be afraid." But I was afraid. Terrified. Not of the house, not even of her family, but of myself. Because a part of me had wanted to smile back. That night, when the chanting began below, I didn't hide. I crept down the staircase, careful, silent. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the family circling once more. Ash lay at the center of the table again, though this time the shape rising from it was clearer. Not a face exactly, but something forming, a mouth, perhaps, a suggestion of hands. They chanted louder, and for the first time, I felt words vibrating in my own throat, spilling out before I could stop them. The language wasn't mine, yet it felt familiar, as though I'd always known it but forgotten until now. Clara's eyes found me across the circle. She smiled, not sweetly, but with triumph. When it ended, the family dispersed silently, leaving me alone with her. "You spoke," she said, almost reverently. "I don't know how," I whispered. My body shook as though from fever. "You don't need to know. You're part of it now. The house chose you." Her words burrowed into me. Part of me wanted to resist, to flee into the night and never look back. But another part, the part that had spoken with them, hungered for more. I lay awake until dawn, listening to whispers in the walls. They were no longer outside me. They were inside. And for the first time, I wondered if my ex-wife had been right all along, if there had always been something fragile in me. Some fracture waiting for the right pressure to split open. I couldn't stay away from that door. Even in daylight, its outline haunted me. The way the shelves seemed to frame it like a secret, the way its handle gleamed faintly though no light reached it. Every time I entered the library, I felt its pull, as though the air around it vibrated with some unheard frequency. The family never spoke of it. If they noticed me lingering near it, they said nothing, but their glances sharpened, their conversations grew hushed. Clara, whenever she caught me staring, would place her hand on my arm and whisper, "Not yet." But not yet became unbearable. One night, after another ritual ended and the house fell into uneasy silence, I slipped from bed. Clara stirred but did not wake, or perhaps she pretended not to. The hall was dark, the portraits watching me as I crept past. My footsteps sounded far too loud. In the library, the door waited. My hand trembled as I reached for the rusted knob. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door opened with a groan that seemed almost relieved. The air beyond was colder, sharp with the scent of damp stone and something acrid, metallic. I stepped inside. The room was narrow, descending by a short flight of steps. At the bottom, the walls were lined not with books but with drawings. Hundreds of them. They covered every surface, sketched in charcoal, ink, even what looked like dried blood. Faces stared from the walls, twisted in fear or ecstasy. Some were strangers, others unsettlingly familiar. I saw Clara's face repeated dozens of times, younger, older, distorted. I saw the uncle, the aunt, cousins, all rendered with wild, obsessive detail. And then I saw myself. Not once but many times. My own face stared back at me from the walls, in states I had never lived, mouths open in silent screams, eyes blackened, skin hollowed. One drawing showed me kneeling in the circle of ash, arms raised, surrounded by figures without faces. My stomach turned. I staggered back, colliding with something in the center of the room. A chair. Heavy, wooden, its arms fitted with leather straps. Stained dark. I froze. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. The whispers began again, not from upstairs, not from outside, but from the walls themselves. Low, urgent, calling me closer. I spun, desperate to leave. Clara stood in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable in the dim light, but her eyes glowed with something between sorrow and triumph. You weren't ready, she said quietly. What is this place? My voice cracked, raw with fear. It's memory, she answered. The house remembers everyone who's entered it. Their faces, their shapes, their fear. It keeps them here, so we don't forget. My breath caught. This is madness. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper now. No. It's belonging. You think you came here by chance, but you didn't. The house wanted you. That's why you're here. I shook my head, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall, the faces brushing against me like a living crowd. No. I met you in London, in a bookshop, Clara smiled, soft and devastating. And do you really believe that was chance? Her words echoed in the small room, magnified by the whispers that rose louder, overlapping until I could almost understand them. My name, again and again, breathed from every wall. I clutched my head, desperate to block it out. Clara's hands were on my shoulders now, firm, grounding. Stop fighting, she murmured. It's worse if you fight. Just let it in. Let us in. For a moment, just a moment, I wanted to. The weight of resisting had become unbearable, the constant fear, the doubts gnawing at my sanity. To surrender meant release, didn't it? But then my eyes fell again on the chair, its straps frayed but functional, its stains too dark to be imagined. My stomach heaved. Whatever this family wanted, whatever the house demanded, it was not release. It was consumption. I shoved past Clara, bolting up the steps. The whispers rose in protest, clawing at my ears. She didn't follow, not immediately. When I dared glance back, she still stood in the doorway, watching me with a sadness that chilled me more than any threat. You'll come back, she whispered. They all do. I slammed the door, chest heaving. But even as I leaned against it, trembling, I felt the house around me breathe, slow, patient, certain that I was already its. I couldn't eat after that night. The sight of food turned my stomach, the clatter of plates felt like mockery. The family watched me with polite concern that barely disguised their satisfaction, as though my unraveling were a necessary step in some inevitable process. Clara stayed close, more tender than ever. She brushed the sweat from my forehead when I woke from nightmares, held my hand in the suffocating silences of the house. Yet her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with the same feverish light I saw in the others. Love and devotion, yes, but not to me. To the house. The days blurred together. I wandered the halls aimlessly, unable to tell if I was awake or still trapped in dreams. The portraits seemed to shift more boldly now, their painted lips curving, their eyes flicking toward me as I passed. Once, I could have sworn one raised its hand in greeting. I avoided the library. The forbidden room had burned itself into my mind, every face etched behind my eyes. Yet I could feel it even from afar, the door humming faintly, the whispers leaking through. The family began to speak openly of me, no longer pretending politeness. He's nearly there, I overheard the aunt murmur one evening, her voice dripping satisfaction. Stronger than some, the uncle replied. But he resists. That makes it worse in the end. Resistance always breaks, another cousin added. The house waits. It always wins. When I stepped into the room, silence fell. All eyes turned toward me, and for a moment I thought they might seize me then and there. But instead, they only smiled, thin, hungry smiles, and resumed their talk in whispers. Clara tried to soothe me. They mean well, she said one night, lying beside me in the dark. They only want you to belong. Belong to what? I demanded. Her silence was worse than any answer. Sleep brought no relief. My dreams were filled with the chair, the straps cutting into my wrists, the ash circling around me, voices chanting until my own mouth moved with theirs. I would wake gasping, only to find Clara watching me with that same unreadable sadness. The breaking point came one afternoon when I tried to leave. I told Clara I needed air, needed to go back into the city, just for a day. Her expression softened but her hands clenched. "You can't," she whispered. "I can. There's a train." "There's no train," she interrupted firmly. "There is." My voice cracked. "I took it here." "I remember." Her eyes glistened. "That was before." "Before what?" She wouldn't say. I stormed from the house, desperate, heart pounding. The iron gates stood open, the path curling back toward the village. Fog smothered the heath, but I forced my way through. My shoes sank in damp earth, my lungs burned with the weight of it. But when the fog parted, I stood again before the house. I froze. I had gone straight. I knew I had. Yet here it was, looming before me, brick blackened, windows glimmering with faint light. I turned, ran the opposite direction, faster this time, the blood pounding in my ears. Again, the fog lifted, and again, the house. Its windows seemed to grin at me. I fell to my knees, gasping, clawing at the ground. I didn't notice Clara until her arms wrapped around me, pulling me close. "Shush," she whispered, stroking my hair. "Don't fight it. Fighting only hurts you." I shoved her away, stumbling back. You knew I couldn't leave." Her eyes shone with tears, but her smile was steady. "Of course. None of us can." The family emerged from the fog then, their figures pale, blurred. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. They knew I had nowhere to go. I staggered back toward the gates, but the iron slammed shut before I reached them. My breath hitched, my vision swimming. The uncle's voice rolled across the mist. "It's time." The family closed in, silent, their faces calm, expectant. Clara stood apart, her expression torn between sorrow and devotion. She whispered, so softly I barely heard, "I am sorry. But you belong to us now." And for the first time, I wondered if she had ever been separate from them at all, or if she had only been the bait the house dangled before me. They led me back inside. I don't remember walking, only the sensation of moving through fog, Clara's hand cool against mine. The house swallowed us whole, doors closing softly behind like the ceiling of a tomb. The family gathered in the dining room, where the table had been cleared. The circle of ash returned, thicker, darker than before. Candles burned low, dripping wax like blood. Their shadows rose along the walls, grotesque, taller than their bodies. I was pushed into the center. Not forcefully, no one laid hands on me, but my feet obeyed before my mind did. The pull was undeniable, a tide dragging me to where they wanted me. Where it wanted me. The chair waited. I shook my head violently, stumbling back. "No. I want," but Clara was suddenly before me, eyes luminous in the candlelight. She touched my cheek with unbearable tenderness. "You already have," she whispered. The family began to chant. Low, rhythmic, the words sliding like oil through the air. My head pounded with each syllable. I clutched my ears, but the sound came from within as much as without. Clara guided me gently into the chair. I didn't resist. The leather straps tightened themselves, cool and unyielding. The chanting grew louder. The walls quivered, the portraits leering with animation. Faces stretched from the wallpaper, mouths moving in silent laughter. The floor pulsed beneath my feet, like a heartbeat. And then the whispers returned, not faint now, but deafening, thousands of voices overlapping, each one my own. Every version of me, from the sketches in the forbidden room, calling out, pleading, mocking, welcoming. I screamed. Or perhaps I only thought I did. My voice was drowned in theirs, absorbed into the chorus. The ash on the table stirred, rising, forming shapes, limbs, faces, shifting and collapsing. Something tried to emerge, something vast and ancient. The family's chant grew frantic, ecstatic. Clara's eyes glistened with tears, her hands clasped as though in prayer. I fought against the straps, certain they were cutting into my flesh, yet when I looked down, my wrists were free. There were no straps. No chair. I stood in the middle of an empty dining room, alone, silent. The candles were unlit, the table bare. I turned in circles, heart hammering. "Clara?" I whispered. No answer. I stumbled through the house, room to room. Every door opened onto emptiness. The portraits were blank canvases. The library was stripped of shelves, the hidden door nothing but solid wall. I collapsed in the hall, sobbing. My mind fractured. Had there ever been a family? Had there been Clara? Or had I dragged myself into this decaying house alone, chasing some memory, some hallucination born of loneliness? A sound drifted from upstairs, a laugh, soft, familiar. Clara's. I staggered up the steps, clinging to the banister. The bedroom door stood ajar, golden light spilling through. My breath caught. Inside, she waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling. "You're still fighting," she said. My voice cracked. "You're not real." Her smile deepened. "Does it matter?" I backed away, shaking. The walls quivered, the floor groaned. Shadows lengthened, reaching for me. Clara rose, her eyes glowing like coals. "You belong here. With me. With us." The voices swelled again, inside and out, filling every corner of my skull until I could no longer tell where I ended and they began. The last thing I remember is the feeling of the house breathing around me, steady and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. And perhaps it does. Whether I ever left that place, whether I am writing these words from a London flat or from the belly of the house itself, I cannot say. Because when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers still. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in through my window, I see Clara standing outside, smiling, waiting for me to remember where I belong.